They chose my sister's baby shower over my cancer treatment, saying I was being dramatic about a few doctor visits. What they didn't know was that the military disability insurance they'd mocked me for filing would soon make me the wealthiest person in our family, and the one they'd all come begging to. They chose my sister's baby shower over my cancer treatment, saying I was being dramatic about a few doctor visits. What they didn't know was that the military disability insurance they'd mocked me for filing would soon make me the wealthiest person in our family, and the one they'd all come begging to. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But let me start from the beginning, when being dismissed by the Chen family became as routine as their Sunday dinners. Masses. I was never the golden child. That title belonged to my sister Melissa, Stanford graduate, corporate lawyer, married to a plastic surgeon, living in their pristine suburban palace in Mill Valley. At every family gathering, she was the centerpiece, the success story, the one who made something of herself. Me? I was Rachel, the one who ran off to play soldier instead of going to college. The one who came back from Afghanistan with what my father called an attitude problem, and what my mother dismissed as needing to adjust to civilian life. They never used the word PTSD, even when the nightmares kept me up for months. They never acknowledged the shrapnel scars on my left arm, even when I couldn't lift grocery bags without wincing. When I worked 3 jobs to afford a tiny apartment in Oakland, they said I was figuring things out. When Melissa bought her second vacation home in Tahoe, they threw a celebration dinner. When I finally saved enough for community college at 28, they asked why I was still playing catch-up. When Melissa announced her pregnancy, they started planning the baby shower 6 months in advance. The pattern was always the same. Family events revolved around Melissa's milestones, her achievements, her needs. I was the afterthought, the problem child, who never quite measured up to their expectations. Even my military service, 2 tours in Afghanistan, a Purple Heart, commendations for bravery under fire, was reduced to Rachel's army phase in their conversations. They never asked about the convoy that hit the IED outside Kandahar. They never wanted to hear about the 3 soldiers I pulled from the wreckage while my own uniform was soaked in blood. They never inquired about the medal ceremony where I stood alone because my family was too busy to attend. To them, my service was just another detour from the path they'd mapped out for my life. When I started getting sick last spring, the dismissals took on a new cruelty. The fatigue I mentioned was probably just depression. The weight loss was me finally getting in shape. The persistent cough was allergies, or maybe you should quit smoking, even though I'd never touched a cigarette in my life. It took months of fighting with the VA system to get proper testing. Months of driving myself to appointments because no one offered to help. Months of facing the possibility of cancer while my family planned elaborate gender reveal parties and discussed nursery themes. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday, stage 2 lung cancer, likely caused by burn pit exposure during my deployments. The oncologist explained that I'd need immediate treatment. Chemotherapy, radiation, possible surgery. He handed me paperwork for military disability claims, explaining that burn pit-related cancers were finally being recognized by the Department of Veterans Affairs. That evening, I called my mother to tell her the news. Her response still echoes in my mind. Well, don't let this drama overshadow Melissa's shower next weekend. She's been planning this for months, and we can't have any negativity affecting her big day. Drama. That's what she called my cancer diagnosis. Drama that might inconvenience my sister's party. The breaking point came exactly 1 week later, when my first chemotherapy session was scheduled for the same Saturday as Melissa's baby shower. I called my mother on Wednesday morning, explaining that I'd need someone to drive me to and from the treatment center. The chemo would last 4 hours, and patients weren't allowed to drive themselves home afterward. It was a simple request. Just transportation and maybe someone to sit with me during the infusion. "This Saturday?" she asked, her voice immediately shifting to that tone I knew too well. "Rachel, you know this Saturday is Melissa's shower. We've had this planned for months. The caterers are coming, the decorations are already ordered, and 50 people are attending. I explained that I hadn't chosen the date. The oncology center had a waiting list, and this was the first available slot. Delaying treatment wasn't an option. The cancer was aggressive, and every week mattered. I'd already pushed back my start date by 2 weeks, trying to accommodate their schedules. "Can't you reschedule?" she pressed. "Or ask one of your army friends to help? This is Melissa's first baby, Rachel. She's been dreaming of this day since she was little." I felt something crack inside my chest, and it wasn't the cancer. "Mom, I have cancer. I'm starting chemotherapy. I need my family." There was a pause, then a sigh that carried 28 years of disappointment. "You're being dramatic, Rachel. It's just a few doctor visits. People deal with medical issues all the time without making it everyone else's problem. Just a few doctor visits." I stared at the prescription bottles lined up on my kitchen counter. Anti-nausea medication, steroids, pain relievers, supplements to help my body survive the poison they were about to pump into my veins. I looked at the binder of paperwork from the oncology center, the dietary restrictions, the list of warning signs that meant I needed to get to the emergency room immediately. "Just a few doctor visits. Besides," she continued, "your father already took time off work to help set up for the party. And your Aunt Linda is flying in from Portland specifically for this. We can't just abandon Melissa when she needs us most." "When she needs us most? What about when I need you most?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Don't be selfish, Rachel. This isn't about you. Melissa is bringing the first grandchild into this family. This baby is our legacy, our future. Your medical situation is temporary, but this baby shower is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Our legacy. Our future." As if my life, my service, my struggle meant nothing compared to an unborn child who would grow up in privilege and comfort, surrounded by the love and support that had never been offered to me. "I pulled 3 soldiers out of a burning vehicle in Afghanistan," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "I have a Purple Heart sitting in a box in my closet because none of you came to the ceremony. I've been fighting cancer alone for months while you planned gender reveals and nursery themes, and you're calling me selfish for asking for a ride to chemotherapy." The silence stretched between us like a battlefield. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice cold and final. "You made your choices, Rachel. You chose the military over college. You chose to live across the bay instead of staying close to family. You chose to be difficult instead of making an effort to fit in. Don't expect us to drop everything now because you're facing consequences." Consequences? As if serving my country and developing service-related cancer was somehow my fault. "I understand," I said quietly. "You've made your priorities clear." I hung up and sat in my empty apartment, staring at the chemotherapy appointment card taped to my refrigerator. For the first time since my diagnosis, I cried, not from fear of the cancer, but from the realization that I was truly alone. That Saturday morning, I drove myself to the chemotherapy center alone. I'd found a rideshare driver willing to wait during my treatment and drive me home afterward. A 70-year-old veteran named Marcus who understood without explanation why I needed help. He'd been through his own cancer battle 5 years earlier, also alone, also abandoned by family who thought military service made you somehow less deserving of support. While 50 people gathered in my parents' backyard to celebrate Melissa's baby shower, I sat in a sterile medical chair with an IV in my arm, watching poison drip into my bloodstream to save my life. The nurses were kind, offering blankets and crackers, checking on me every few minutes. They treated me with more compassion in 4 hours than my family had shown in months. My phone buzzed with photos from the shower, Melissa glowing in a pink maternity dress, surrounded by gift boxes and balloons. My mother had posted them to Facebook with captions about family love and blessed moments. I wasn't in a single photo, but then again, I wasn't missed. The nausea hit on the drive home. Marcus pulled over twice so I could be sick on the side of the road. He didn't complain, didn't act disgusted, just handed me water and waited patiently. When we reached my apartment, he helped me up the stairs and made sure I had everything I needed before leaving his phone number. "In case you need anything, soldier." A complete stranger showed me more care than my own blood family. That evening, as I lay in bed fighting waves of nausea and bone-deep exhaustion, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to keep reaching out to people who saw my pain as an inconvenience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I wasn't going to beg for scraps of attention from family members who had made it clear where I ranked in their priorities. I was going to focus on surviving, on healing, and on building the life I deserved, without them. The first step was getting serious about my VA disability claim. The paperwork had been sitting on my kitchen table for weeks, intimidating and complex. But that night, I spread it all out and began filling out every form, documenting every symptom, every medical appointment, every piece of evidence that connected my cancer to my military service. I contacted a veterans advocacy group that specialized in burn pit exposure cases. They assigned me a claims advocate named Janet Reyes, a former Marine who'd fought similar battles for hundreds of veterans. She reviewed my medical records, my deployment history, and my exposure documentation. "This is a strong case," she told me during our first phone call. "Burn pit exposure cases are finally getting the recognition they deserve. Your cancer type, combined with your deployment locations and timeline, creates a compelling medical nexus. We're not just talking about standard disability compensation here. This could qualify for special monthly compensation due to the severity and service connection." I didn't understand all the legal terminology, but I understood her confidence. For the first time in months, someone was taking my situation seriously, treating it as legitimate rather than dramatic. While my family posted more baby shower photos and planned elaborate gender reveal parties, I quietly assembled a legal case that would validate everything I'd been fighting for. I attended every medical appointment alone, documented every symptom, and followed every treatment protocol with military precision. The isolation was painful, but it was also clarifying. Without the constant emotional drain of trying to earn my family's attention, I could focus entirely on what mattered: surviving and building a foundation for my future. They thought they were abandoning me, but they were actually setting me free. 6 months later, while my family celebrated Melissa's growing belly and planned elaborate nursery themes, my life was quietly transforming in ways they couldn't imagine. The chemotherapy had been brutal but effective. My oncologist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, monitored my progress with cautious optimism. The tumors were shrinking faster than expected, and my body was responding well to treatment, despite the harsh side effects. What she didn't know was that my military training had prepared me for this kind of fight. The discipline to follow protocols exactly, the mental toughness to endure suffering, and the strategic thinking to treat recovery like a mission. While they posted baby bump photos and discussed cribs, I was building something bigger. Janet Reyes had been right about my disability case. The VA's review process, usually a nightmare of bureaucratic delays, was moving with unusual speed. My medical evidence was ironclad: deployment records showing exact dates at Forward Operating Base Liberty in Iraq, where massive burn pits operated 24 hours a day, air quality reports documenting toxic exposure levels, medical records creating a clear timeline from deployment to diagnosis. But what my family didn't know was that my case had caught the attention of something much larger than a routine disability claim. The Department of Veterans Affairs was building a massive class action database of burn pit exposure cases, and my documentation was becoming a cornerstone example. My detailed deployment logs, combined with my meticulous medical records, provided the kind of evidence that could help thousands of other veterans fighting similar battles. Janet called me on a Tuesday with news that made my hands shake. "Rachel, I need you to sit down. The VA's decision came through, but this is bigger than we expected. You've been approved for 100% permanent and total disability compensation, plus special monthly compensation for loss of use of creative organs due to your lung capacity reduction." I stared at the phone, not fully understanding what she was telling me. "The monthly payments alone will be substantial," she continued, "but there's more. Due to the severity of your case and its value as evidence for future claims, you're also receiving a retroactive lump sum payment back to your diagnosis date, plus an additional settlement as part of the VA's new burn pit victim compensation fund." The numbers she quoted made my apartment feel too small. While my family planned baby showers and discussed mortgage payments on vacation homes, I was about to receive a financial settlement that would dwarf their combined annual incomes. More than that, my case was being used to establish legal precedent that would help thousands of veterans get the compensation they deserved. But the money wasn't even the biggest change in my life. duties, Dr. Martinez had introduced me to a support group for young veterans dealing with service-related cancers. What started as weekly meetings had evolved into something unexpected. I'd become a mentor to newly diagnosed veterans, helping them navigate the VA system and treatment protocols. My military experience, combined with my successful battle against cancer and the VA bureaucracy, made me uniquely qualified to guide others through the same fight. Veterans from across the country were contacting me for advice, and several advocacy organizations had asked me to speak at conferences. I was building a network, a community, a purpose that extended far beyond my personal survival. My family still saw me as the problem child who'd made poor choices and was dealing with the consequences. They had no idea that while they planned parties, I was becoming a voice for thousands of forgotten veterans, and that my dramatic medical situation was about to make me the most financially secure person in the Chen family. The invitation to Melissa's baby's first birthday party arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday, 8 months after the last chemotherapy session that had saved my life. It was printed on expensive cardstock with gold lettering. Join us as little Emma celebrates her first year of bringing joy to the Chen family. The return address was my parents' house in Marin County, the same house where they'd chosen a baby shower over my cancer treatment. I almost threw it away. Almost. But something made me keep it, maybe curiosity about whether they'd learned anything from my year of silence. Since that devastating phone call about the baby shower, I'd had minimal contact with my family. A few text messages on holidays, perfunctory responses when they occasionally asked how my medical situation was going. They had no idea I'd been declared cancer-free 3 months earlier. They didn't know about the VA settlement that had transformed my life. They certainly didn't know that their abandoned daughter had become a successful advocate, earning 6 figures from speaking engagements and consulting work with veterans organizations. The party was being held at Golden Gate Park's Corrette Playground, with catered food and what the invitation described as a celebration of family love and new beginnings. 50 people were invited, including extended family I hadn't seen since before my deployment. I decided to go. Not for reconciliation, not for forgiveness, but because I was curious to see if anything had changed. I wanted to observe the family dynamics from my new perspective, as someone who no longer needed their approval or support. I arrived 30 minutes after the stated start time, wearing a simple navy dress and carrying a modest gift bag with a children's book. The party was exactly what I'd expected: perfectly coordinated decorations in pink and gold, professional catering, and my mother orchestrating every detail like a military operation. Melissa looked radiant, having quickly returned to her pre-pregnancy figure and designer wardrobe. She was surrounded by the same circle of family members who'd always orbited around her achievements. Emma was adorable, a chubby-cheeked baby who gurgled happily as relatives took turns holding her. I found an empty spot at a picnic table near the edge of the gathering, close enough to observe, but far enough away to avoid forced conversations. Several relatives nodded politely when they noticed me, but no one approached. I was still the family's awkward outlier, the one who didn't quite fit. My father was grilling hamburgers and telling stories about his successful contracting business. My mother was directing the gift opening ceremony like she was producing a television show. My cousins discussed their latest home renovations and vacation plans. Nothing had changed. "Rachel!" Melissa approached with Emma on her hip, her smile bright but carefully measured. "I'm so glad you could make it. How are you feeling? Mom said you had some health issues last year." Some health issues. Stage 2 cancer had been reduced to, quote, some health issues. "I'm doing very well," I replied, accepting Emma's tiny outstretched hand. "She's beautiful, Melissa. You must be very happy." "We are. Being parents has been the most incredible experience." She paused, studying my face. "You look good, different somehow. More settled." If she only knew how settled my life had become. "And how's work going?" she asked. "Are you still doing that community college thing?" That community college thing. I'd graduated summa cum laude 6 months earlier with a degree in social work, but they'd never asked about my progress. "I've moved into advocacy work," I said simply. helping veterans navigate healthcare and benefits systems. That's nice, she replied with the same tone she'd used to acknowledge a hobby. Well, I should get back to the guests. Thanks for coming. I watched her walk away, still the center of attention, still blissfully unaware that her discarded sister was living a life that would soon overshadow everything they'd celebrated. I was watching my uncle tell the same story about his fishing trip for the third time, when a woman in a crisp business suit approached the playground entrance, scanning the crowd with professional efficiency. She carried a leather portfolio and moved with the purposeful stride of someone on official business. Several party guests noticed her arrival, their conversations faltering as they tried to place this stranger among the invited family and friends. The woman approached my mother, who was arranging gift bags near the picnic tables. I couldn't hear their conversation from my position across the playground, but I watched my mother's expression shift from polite confusion to growing concern. After a brief exchange, my mother pointed in my direction. The woman thanked her and began walking toward me, her heels clicking against the concrete pathway with measured steps. "Ms. Rachel Chen?" she asked as she reached my table. "Yes. I'm Patricia Hawkins from Redwood Legal Services. I've been trying to reach you for the past week. Your phone has been going straight to voicemail. I'd been screening calls from unknown numbers, assuming they were medical billing offices or telemarketers. I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting any legal correspondence. Is there a problem with something?" Patricia opened her portfolio and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "Quite the opposite, actually. I represent the law firm handling the final disbursement of your Veterans Affairs settlement. We've been trying to deliver these documents for signature, but this was the only current address we had on file for reaching you." My stomach dropped. Around us, party conversations were gradually quieting as family members strained to overhear our discussion. My father had abandoned his grilling station and was moving closer, his expression curious and concerned. "I can handle this later," I said quietly, hoping to deflect attention. "This probably isn't the appropriate venue for legal matters." Patricia consulted her tablet. "Unfortunately, we have a time-sensitive deadline. The final settlement check needs to be processed before the end of this business week, or it gets pushed to the next fiscal quarter. I understand this is inconvenient, but the amount involved makes immediate processing critical." "Amount?" The question came from my cousin David, who had materialized beside our table with undisguised interest. Patricia glanced at him, then back at me. "I can only discuss specifics with Ms. Chen, but I can say that this represents the final disbursement of her class action settlement related to military service-connected medical claims." By now, a small crowd had gathered. My mother approached with that forced smile she wore when she sensed potential family drama brewing in public. Melissa stood nearby, still holding Emma, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Rachel, what's this about?" my mother asked, her voice carrying the same tone she'd used when I was 15 and caught sneaking out. "You didn't mention any legal issues." Patricia looked between me and my gathering family members. "Ms. Chen, would you prefer to discuss this privately? I can see this is a family celebration, and I don't want to interrupt, but these documents really do require immediate attention." "Documents for what exactly?" my father asked, his contracting instincts making him suspicious of any legal paperwork he couldn't control. I felt the weight of 28 years of dismissal and marginalization pressing down on me. They were all staring now, waiting for an explanation, probably expecting another one of my dramatic situations that would require their reluctant attention. "It's related to my military service," I said simply. "Military service?" my mother laughed nervously. "Rachel, you were only in the Army for a few years. What kind of legal settlement could possibly be involved?" Patricia checked her watch, then looked at me expectantly. The moment of truth had arrived, whether I was ready or not. Patricia opened her portfolio and pulled out a document with official letterhead. Her voice carried across the playground with professional clarity that cut through the birthday party chatter. "Ms. Chen, I need your signature on the final disbursement agreement for your Department of Veterans Affairs settlement, totaling $2.4 million, plus your ongoing monthly disability compensation of $8,200. Additionally, there's the retroactive payment of $340,000, covering the period from your initial diagnosis to claim approval." The playground fell silent, except for the distant sound of children playing on swings. My mother's face went white. My father's hamburger spatula clattered to the ground. Melissa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Even baby Emma seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, looking around with wide eyes. "I'm sorry," my cousin David stammered. "Did you say $2.4 million? Patricia consulted her tablet again. The settlement includes compensation for burn pit exposure, resulting in service-connected lung cancer, loss of earning capacity, pain and suffering, and Ms. Chen's contribution as a key witness in the class action lawsuit that secured benefits for over 15,000 veterans. Her case documentation was instrumental in establishing the legal precedent." My uncle dropped his beer bottle. It shattered on the concrete, sending amber liquid across the pathway. "There must be some mistake," my mother said, her voice thin and shaky. "Rachel had some medical issues, but she was never... this can't be right." Patricia turned to face my mother directly. "Ma'am, Miss Chen served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, received a Purple Heart for valor, and developed stage 2 lung cancer from toxic burn pit exposure during her deployments. Her military medical records show she saved multiple lives during an IED attack outside Kandahar, which resulted in her own injuries." The words hung in the air like smoke. "She also completed her bachelor's degree summa cum laude while undergoing chemotherapy," Patricia continued, "and has become one of the leading advocates for veterans' rights on the West Coast. Her testimony before Congress last month was pivotal in securing additional funding for burn pit research." Testimony before Congress. They didn't even know I'd graduated college. My father found his voice first. "Rachel, is this true?" I looked around at the circle of faces staring at me, the same faces that had dismissed my service as playing soldier, reduced my cancer to some health issues, and chosen a baby shower over my chemotherapy. "Every word," I said quietly. Patricia handed me a pen. "The settlement check will be deposited within 72 hours of signature. Your monthly disability payments have already begun, retroactive to your approval date 6 months ago." My hands were steady as I signed the documents. Combat had taught me to stay calm under pressure, and chemotherapy had taught me that some battles are won through endurance rather than force. "There's one more thing," Patricia said, pulling out another document. "The Veterans Administration has asked me to inform you that they're establishing the Rachel Chen Advocacy Center at the Oakland VA Hospital. Your case has helped secure funding for a comprehensive burn pit treatment program." Melissa was crying now, though I couldn't tell if it was from shock or shame. My mother had sunk onto a nearby bench, staring at me as if seeing a stranger. "Why didn't you tell us?" my father asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him, remembering every dismissive comment, every missed ceremony, every time they'd made me feel like my service meant nothing. "You never asked," I replied. "You were too busy celebrating everything else." Patricia packed up her portfolio and handed me a business card. "Congratulations, Ms. Chen. You've earned every penny of this settlement, and much more than that, you've earned the respect of an entire veteran community." She walked away, leaving my family to process what they'd just learned about the daughter they'd never bothered to know. The silence stretched for what felt like hours before my phone rang, cutting through the stunned atmosphere. The caller ID showed a number I recognized immediately. Senator Maria Rodriguez's office, the chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee. "I should take this," I said, stepping away from the gathering. Several family members followed at a distance, still processing what they'd just learned. "Rachel, this is Senator Rodriguez. I'm calling because we just received confirmation that the burn pit legislation passed the Senate by a unanimous vote. Your testimony last month was the turning point we needed." I could hear the celebration in her voice, but I also caught the underlying urgency. "There's something else," she continued. "We've been contacted by the Department of Defense. They want to discuss a consulting position for the new Toxic Exposure Research Initiative. It's a $20 million program, and they specifically requested you to head the Veterans Advocacy component." I glanced back at my family, who were pretending not to strain to hear my conversation while they cleaned up scattered party debris. The position would involve traveling to testify before Congress, working with medical researchers at Walter Reed, and establishing treatment protocols for other toxic exposure cases, the senator explained. It's a significant responsibility, but your case has become the gold standard for burn pit documentation. My mother approached hesitantly, her face pale and confused. Rachel, who is that? I covered the phone. Senator Rodriguez, chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee. My father nearly dropped the plate he was holding. Senator Rodriguez continued, there's also media interest. CNN wants to interview you for a documentary about veterans' health care, and the Washington Post is running a feature story about your case next Sunday. Your story is helping thousands of veterans who've been fighting similar battles alone. Thousands of veterans. Just like I had been fighting alone while my family planned parties. I understand this is overwhelming, she said, but time is critical. The DoD position needs to be filled within 2 weeks, and the research initiative launches next month. Are you interested in discussing the details? I looked around the playground where my niece's first birthday party was supposed to be a celebration of family joy. Instead, it had become the moment when my family finally understood who I really was and what I'd accomplished while they weren't paying attention. Yes, Senator. I'm very interested. Excellent. My office will send you the full briefing materials tonight. Rachel, I want you to understand something. Your courage in coming forward hasn't just secured your own future. You've opened doors for an entire generation of veterans who were being ignored and dismissed. After I hung up, my family stood around me in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from shock to shame, to something that might have been awe. Rachel, Melissa said softly, still holding Emma, I had no idea, we had no idea. My mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. The cancer. When you called and asked for help getting to chemotherapy, you chose the baby shower, I finished quietly. You told me I was being dramatic about a few doctor visits. The words hit her like a physical blow. She actually staggered backward. We could have lost you, my father said, his voice breaking. You were fighting cancer alone and we abandoned you. I felt the weight of the moment. Not just their recognition of my achievements, but their dawning realization of how completely they'd failed me when I needed them most. The irony, I said, looking around at their stricken faces, is that you abandoning me actually made me stronger. When I stopped trying to earn your support, I could focus entirely on surviving and building something meaningful. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Settlement deposited. Welcome to your new life. But I was already living my new life. The money was just confirmation of what I'd built through my own strength while they weren't watching. My phone rang again before anyone could respond to my last statement. This time it was Dr. Martinez, my oncologist, and the urgency in her voice immediately shifted my focus away from the family drama surrounding me. Rachel, I'm sorry to call during your weekend, but we have a situation at the hospital. There's a young veteran here, Maria Santos, 23 years old. Just diagnosed with the same type of lung cancer you had. Burn pit exposure from her deployment in Syria. I stepped further away from my family, my voice dropping to the professional tone I'd developed during my advocacy work. What's her status? Stage 2, aggressive growth pattern, but very treatable if we act quickly. The problem is she's refusing treatment. She's convinced she can't afford it, and her family doesn't understand the severity. She's talking about just letting it run its course. My chest tightened. I could picture this young woman exactly. Scared, alone, probably being told by people around her that she was overreacting, just like I had been. She asked specifically to speak with you. Dr. Martinez continued. I showed her some of the advocacy materials you've developed, and she said if someone like you could get through this, maybe she could too. Can you come in? I looked back at my family. My mother was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. My father was staring at the ground, his hands clenched at his sides. Melissa was bouncing Emma gently, but her attention was completely focused on me. For the first time in my adult life, I had their full, undivided attention. This was the moment I'd imagined for years. My family finally seeing me, finally understanding what they'd missed, finally ready to apologize and try to make amends. Part of me wanted to stay, to savor this vindication, to let them grovel and explain and promise to do better. But a 23-year-old veteran was sitting in a hospital bed, terrified and alone, convinced her life was over. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I told Dr. Martinez. I ended the call and turned back to my family. "I have to go." "Now?" my mother asked, her voice small and confused. "But we need to talk. We need to understand. To apologize." "Rachel, please," my father added. "We've been fools. We've been terrible to you. Can't you stay so we can figure out how to fix this?" For a moment, I felt the old familiar pull, the desperate desire for their approval, the hope that maybe this time would be different, that maybe they would finally see my worth and treat me like I mattered. But then I remembered Maria Santos, sitting alone in a hospital bed, facing the same terror I'd faced when I thought I was going to die alone and forgotten. "There's a young veteran at the hospital who needs help navigating her cancer diagnosis," I said simply. "She's 23, scared, and her family doesn't understand what she's going through. She asked for me specifically." "Can't someone else handle it?" Melissa asked. "This is important, Rachel. We're your family." I looked at her, holding her beautiful, healthy baby, surrounded by people who had celebrated every moment of her life, while dismissing every achievement of mine. "You're right," I said. "This is important, which is exactly why I have to go." I picked up my purse and the gift bag I'd brought for Emma. "You've made it clear for 28 years that other things are more important than supporting me when I need help. Today, I'm choosing to be the person I needed when I was lying in that chemotherapy chair alone." I started walking toward the parking lot, then turned back one last time. "When you're ready to have a real conversation about how we move forward, call me. But right now, someone who actually needs me is waiting." For the first time in my life, I walked away from my family to serve a higher purpose. And it felt exactly right. 3 months later, I stood before the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee in Washington, D.C., delivering my final testimony on the Toxic Exposure Research Initiative. The gallery was packed with veterans, advocates, and family members whose lives had been transformed by the legislation we'd fought to pass. In the front row sat Maria Santos, now halfway through her chemotherapy treatments and thriving. Her family had flown in from Texas to hear me speak, the woman who had helped their daughter believe she could survive. Next to them sat Marcus, the veteran who had driven me to my first chemo session, now volunteer coordinator for our Oakland Advocacy Center. My family wasn't there, but for the first time in my life their absence didn't create a hollow ache in my chest. Innies. They had called, of course. Multiple times. My mother left tearful voicemails apologizing for their years of dismissal. My father sent lengthy text messages expressing his pride and regret. Melissa wrote an email explaining how much she wanted to rebuild our relationship and asking if I could find it in my heart to forgive them. But forgiveness wasn't something I needed to grant or withhold. Understanding was what I'd found instead. I understood now that their inability to see my worth had never been about my actual value. It had been about their limited capacity to recognize strength that didn't look like their definition of success. They had been so focused on conventional achievements, degrees from prestigious schools, high-paying careers, traditional family milestones, that they couldn't see the courage it took to serve in combat, the determination required to survive cancer alone, or the impact of building something meaningful from nothing. Their dismissal had been painful, but it had also been unintentionally liberating. When I stopped seeking their approval, I discovered my own voice. When I stopped trying to fit their narrow definition of success, I built something far more significant than anything they had celebrated. After my testimony, Senator Rodriguez approached me in the hallway. "Rachel, the president's office called this morning. They want to discuss a position with the new National Veterans Health Initiative. It would mean a move to Washington and a significant increase in responsibility." I looked out the window at the Capitol dome gleaming in the afternoon sun. 2 years ago, I had been sitting in a chemo chair, abandoned by my family and fighting for my life. Now I was being offered a position that could impact veterans' healthcare policy for decades. "I'm interested," I said, "but I have one condition. I want to maintain my direct advocacy work. The phone calls from scared veterans, the hospital visits, The one-on-one support, that's where real change happens. She smiled. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. That evening, I called my mother. Not because I needed her approval, but because I had something to tell her that she deserved to hear. Rachel, she answered immediately, her voice cautious and hopeful. Mom, I wanted you to know that I'm moving to Washington to work on veterans policy at the national level. There was a long pause. We're proud of you, honey. We're so proud of you. I know you are now, I said gently, and I appreciate that. But I want you to understand something important. I didn't build this life to prove you wrong or to make you proud. I built it because it's who I was meant to be. I could hear her crying softly. The person you see now, the successful advocate, the policy expert, the survivor, she was always there. You just weren't looking in the right direction. After we hung up, I sat in my hotel room overlooking the Potomac River, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't being seen by the people you thought you needed. Sometimes it's discovering that you never needed to be seen by them at all. You just needed to see yourself clearly enough to build the life you deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.